Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Hey, it's another year, another time to make some more money, and I've got the course for you. Start the Conversation, Get the Meeting will help your team, both business development, sales development, get into those new cold accounts, whether that function is under marketing or sales. I'll help you with that by starting organic, natural conversations, not pitching. Have people open up with you, build up a connection with them, understand your total addressable market, prioritize it, and put in a system that scales, that's predictable, that works the way you want it to work instead of the old school pitch. Believe me, I've sat through so many of these cold calling seminars, courses, books, and I've been doing it for 30 years, and it's evolved. And what I'm doing today is what's working in today's world. It works naturally, and people are just loving it, getting meetings, closing deals, and doing it without the rejection that is typically there in sales. So check it out at b2brevenue.com under the training tab. You can schedule a call with me. We can talk it over. I'll explain how it works and how we can work together on it. You can buy it per student, or I'll customize it for your particular product and team and coach you through that process. Also, if you're a sales leader and you want predictability, you want direction, momentum, and control with your deals, you can sign up for that course as well. Same type of model. A year-long access to it. It's content, community, and coaching, all included at b2brevenue.com. You can get my free ebook there on how companies make product selections. That's all free. Let's get into the interview, but I want to make sure you're checking out my partners. They're in the show notes. This week, it's Pipedrive and CoVideo. Pipedrive is the new CRM. It's been out for 5 years. I've been using it forever. I love that. It's connected up with your email, your calendar, and now they have team capabilities. CoVideo is the video email system. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's the way to break into new accounts. It's so much more engaging than text. Check them out. Also, make sure you're checking me out on LinkedIn, Brian G. Burns on LinkedIn. Let's get into the interview. I'll sum it up at the end. Hey, Jay and Gary, welcome to the show. As a way of getting started, Gary, why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
Absolutely. First off, thank you for having us on the show here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
My name is G. Riley Mills. I go by Gary, and I'm the co-founder of Pinnacle Performance Company, a global communication skills training firm. We train in 50 countries around the world, a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and I'm the co-author of the new book, The Bullseye Principle, about communication.
And Jay?
My name is Jay Bonensinger. I'm mostly known as a novelist. I have 30 books in print. I've been doing it most of my adult life. I've had a lot of good fortune in that arena as a storyteller and screenwriter and filmmaker. But my day job is really as an author, and I'm probably best known as the author of the Walking Dead novels. There are 8 of them. And they're kind of parallel stories that run on the same timeline as the TV show, and they tie in with the TV show. And I've just, over the years, learned these fundamentals of building narratives to communicate with people and to demonstrate your passion for a subject that motivates and inspires people. And I've started to put them to good use in the business world with Gary. Gary's been nice enough to ask me to join him on this new program.
And how'd you guys meet?
That's a good question. I don't remember.
We met through a filmmaker, Darren Callahan, very talented writer who introduced us. I think we went to a Bulls game and just found a love of narrative and a love of story between all of us, but especially between Jay and I, and decided we got to figure out some way to work together. So we've been putting together this Story Power program that we've been doing at big companies around the country, which has been great. Just teaching people how to use narrative to influence their audiences, to overcome objections, to create a vision. It's been really exciting.
Yeah, I have to add real quick that years ago I started teaching screenwriting at Northwestern University, and now I teach off and on as a visiting professor at Northwestern, DePaul University, both in the Chicago area, and University of Cincinnati. And it was almost eerie how closely linked and lined up my fundamentals that I was teaching students in terms of how to tell a story on film with Gary's and Pinnacle's philosophies and fundamentals that they were teaching to business leaders. It was really kismet when we realized how closely they lined up. It was exciting.
Very, very great synergy. It was exciting to see how we could put those together and partner up. So we've been doing these story power sessions around the country. We did a big one at the ballroom at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, which was fantastic. And we're doing 2 big ones in Washington, D.C. coming up in May. So very excited to keep sharing this story power, all these tools and techniques that literally anybody can use story. A lot of people think, oh, you got to be born a great storyteller. Why is that guy such a great storyteller? Why is she such a great storyteller? It's really not something that you're born with. If you use these tools and techniques, these skills we lay out, anybody, once they understand narrative, anybody can tell a great story. It's really not rocket science. There's a very simple formula, and we share it in our program.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want to dig into that to see kind of or share what people will get out of it?
Absolutely.
I'm curious to see what Gary says as a top line thing, but I think, it's easier to learn these techniques than it is to learn to play piano. It's because they really are based on human emotion and just pretty much being human. And that kind of ties in with my overall overarching principle, which is, when you're communicating with narrative, when you're telling a story, less is more. It's not about the amount of information you're giving to somebody. It's not about, bullet points of facts and numbers. Anybody can do that. You can do that. You can give a piece of paper to somebody that does that. Really great storytelling is about expressing emotion. That's what people remember.
And
Gary, what would you say? Gary, go ahead. What would your top line?
So that's the great thing about story and narrative is they help influence emotion to motivate action, right? You make people feel something, so it's easier to get them to do something. That's what we teach in the story power sessions. And if you just look at narrative in real life and in what's going on currently even in the United States or in the UK, which I spend a lot of time traveling over there. And right now with Brexit, just the narrative of that keeps shifting and changing, and no one knows where this is going. So there's so much uncertainty and there's so much anxiety because of that. If you look at just take what happened this week with this Mueller report. Now, not to get too deep into the politics of it, but the whole thing was about narrative, right? And controlling the narrative. And the Attorney General really wanted to control for as long as he could the narrative of what this report was about. And now the report's out and the narrative's shifting. And now the narrative's changing a different way. And I'm guessing it's going to shift back. And everybody's trying to control the story of what's happening, which for me and what I do and what we teach, it's fascinating to watch.
And let's get back to the emotion part of that, because people, I focus mostly on sales and marketing, and to have people take action, it is obviously keyed off by an emotion and justified with logic. How do you work, what emotions work best into stories?
It all depends on what the intent is behind your story, what your objective is, what you're trying to accomplish. If you're working with salespeople, I don't know if I've ever met a good salesperson who's not a great storyteller.
Yeah.
Right? Salespeople are always great at telling stories. Why? Because they use stories to build rapport with their audience, right? You're meeting with a new client. I got to get to know them. I got to build trust. So I got to build trust. I got to build rapport. A story can do that. If you're a salesperson, you're going to have to overcome objections. That client comes at you. It's too expensive. It's too complicated. It's going to take too long. If you have a story or an anecdote from a similar situation where you solved a problem for a client that had similar concerns, story is very easy. It's a very simple, quick way to be able to do that.
And
Yeah,
what's
I mean, I'll just add that, story speaks to brand. Story it imprints a person's heart and mind. Like, for instance, and I go back to, minimalism, less is more. Just do it. Just do it is one of the most brilliant slogans and campaigns ever devised, because it has this emotion behind it in the story of those 3 words. Because, so it's almost like seeing subtitles in a film. It's just like, I really don't have the time to get out and exercise or play tennis. I used to play in high school, but I kind of miss it. And just do it. Just do it. These are emotional calls to action.
Yeah. That's it. I don't know if you've ever seen the Nike YouTube channel, but they do an unbelievably great job.
Excellent example. There you go. That's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, another way I explain it to people is, you take 2 great shoe company, 2 great athletic footwear companies, Nike and Reebok. Very, very similar companies. Tell me, what is Reebok's brand? What is the foundation of Reebok? What does Reebok mean to you?
I have no idea. Yeah.
That's the point. There's this permanent imprinting in your brain from just do it. It's brilliant.
That's it. And they then tie their brand to these athletes, like what they've done with Tiger Woods. I don't know if you saw the recent video of him.
Oh, yeah.
Or Colin Kaepernick, or
you're absolutely spot on, Brian. That's the Tiger Woods phenomena is a story. Yeah. It really you have to touch on Tiger Woods' story, because it's a magnificent story. It's a magnificent narrative. And that's what it's all about.
And that's it. And so long, because he's been playing golf for 40 years.
Right. Right. I mean, it reminds me of when I was a kid. I was a huge tennis fan. I remember loving, the big finals matches at Wimbledon when it was, Bjorn Borg and McEnroe, and it was like the cool, super hip Swede, emotionless Swede, and the crazy hothead American, and they were meeting, in this, no pun intended, but this pinnacle of sports on that court, and it was just it begged to be told as a story with a beginning, middle, and end.
And you also loved it because McEnroe, you wouldn't know what he's going to say, how he's going to act, if he's going to throw his racket, if he's going to explode. So that's another element of storytelling that we teach in Story Power, is never underestimate the power of surprise. Surprise in presentations, in meetings, in conference calls. It's that power of surprise. That's one of the things that drives narrative, right? We don't know what's right around the corner. So as a storyteller, as someone who's maybe a leader or a salesperson, if you can hold back information till the last second and then reveal it, people love that, because it gets their dopamine going. It gets them excited. It surprises them.
Yes.
And what do people typically do wrong?
Oh, great question. That's an excellent question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Well, I'll throw this out very briefly, then throw it over to you, Gary. But I kind of touched on it already, which is people think the more words I use, the more they'll be moved. If I just really plaster this person with verbiage, they'll sooner or later they'll get it. And that's probably for me, that's the biggest mistake anybody makes in any medium, not just verbal sales, not just leadership, not just communicating with your team, but any medium, any written medium. That's the number one mistake I see.
Yeah, you got to keep it tight. I recently saw someone speaking, and they talked about, as you're writing a story or crafting your story, don't think of it as you're being paid per word. Think of it as if you are paying per word. So it's going to be more economical for you to use less words because it's going to get expensive for all those words you don't need. The other thing is people don't understand when they're telling a story how they want the audience to feel and what they want the audience to do at the end. So the audience is just listening going, okay, I don't really know what I'm supposed to feel about this story. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, going back to the point I made earlier, is don't give away the good part at the beginning. For example, if I were going to tell you the story about how I met the Pope, the worst way I could start that story out would be to say, let me tell you the story about how I met the Pope. I've just given the best part of the story away. Instead, I'm going to take you on a journey and keep the conflict tight, keep you guessing. Okay, I'm in Europe with my fiance. Yep. Okay. And now the train stopped in Rome. Yep. That's interesting. And the crowds, and we're going to stop at the Vatican. We have 3 hours before we have to jump back on the train. And this crowd parts. All these things are building up to what's going to happen, and then you build to that climax, and that's what gets an audience excited.
So, yeah, I would totally add and agree and add to that's what really we teach is these moments. Where do they belong? How are they best crafted and presented? And there are milestones, and it goes back literally thousands of years. These are almost ancient, some of them ancient fundamentals in capturing a listener's imagination.
Yeah, and the story power sessions that Jay and I have been doing, the great thing about them is we can do 150,000 people in a session, and believe it or not, they're interactive. It's not you sitting listening to a lecture. It's interactive, and we're doing things. We're actually people in the audience are actually creating and crafting and trying these tools and these formulas out, and we show them how they work right there in the room.
Yeah, exactly. It's an experiential skill that you can learn. And Gary's not to sound like a mutual admiration society, but Gary comes from theater and acting, and Pinnacle's one of their core lessons of their brand is performance. How to stand in front of a group, how to connect physically with body language, with internal being externalized, your thoughts being transferred into feelings, and really connecting that way. So it being someone who's in show business and in the literary world and film, it really jived with just my experiences with my work and translating them to the printed page or to the screen.
It was fun. In the one we did in Vegas at the Bellagio, we started out by saying, how many of you in this audience feel like you're great storytellers? These were pharmaceutical salespeople, different types of salespeople, yeah. and just a couple hands, right? Just a handful of people. We said, well, by the end of this, we're going to guess that most of you are going to be raising your hand saying I'm a great storyteller. And it was fun to watch over the course of the couple hours as people tried these things out, that we had so many amazing stories, and we were able to show them. We in fact brought a couple up on stage in front of the whole group at the ballroom of the Bellagio to tell these stories that had the audience just amazed. You could have heard a pin drop. It was amazing.
Yeah, and I think that this goes again. It speaks to our time that we live in and the zeitgeist, because you give our audiences a chance to, let's say, for instance, tell their own origin story. This is one of the big pillars of what we talk about is what exactly is an origin story. And I think they're used to responding or connecting with a politician who says, my parents moved to this country. They were immigrants. They didn't have a dime. They sold, fruit on the street, and they raised me, with love. And I went to public school, and I had great teachers. And all of a sudden, you want to vote for this person, and and sometimes you don't even know why. But it's because you're connecting with that narrative, and so when we give our audiences a chance to, hey, come, or show of hands, anybody have an origin story that they'd like to tell? By the time we're in the last act of our presentation, everybody's like, oh, I got one.
Yeah,
they're magnificent.
The other thing too is I'm so always surprised how we get into these sessions with executives and they say, I don't have any stories. Oh, you guys have such great stories. I don't have any stories. Well, of course you do. Your whole life is filled with probably unbelievable stories that either happened to you or someone in your family. And so that's one of the other things we're able to do is help them identify and mine those personal experiences. And we break down the different buckets that, you have to have, like Jay said, your origin story. Everybody knows the story about how Steve Jobs started Apple in his garage, right? They started it in the garage and it grew into this giant thing. There's the origin story. How did you meet your partner, your spouse, your wife, your husband? How did you come to this company? How did you start your company? How did you decide to go to that school? Those are all origin stories that we love. We love crucible stories. There's lots of lessons in what we call the crucible story, which is tell me something that you came up against that was tough, a challenge that you barely overcame, whether it's personal, a health issue, a cancer diagnosis, or a downsizing, you got let go, or the economy shifted. You were in real estate in 2008. All of a sudden, the real estate market collapsed. Now I got to reinvent myself. Now I got to figure out where to go. Those are all crucible stories. Those are great. People love those. There's lessons. And then also we love, and we're a big fan of the pie in the face story. We call it the pie in the face story, but it's a story where you made a mistake. You screwed up. You did something dumb. You misjudged, but you learned from it. And those stories, especially when they come from a salesperson, a leader, an executive, we love those stories because they show that you're human, you're self-aware, you have a bit of sense of humor about yourself. Those are great, and there's tons of lessons in there that you can use with your clients, with your team, with your boss, if it's an appropriate story.
And are you finding that business people try and stay too fact-based and not circumvent this and go to the emotions to become liked, what I call known, liked, and trusted?
Sure, story can definitely be used for that. And so
that's so true. That's
true stories, absolutely.
Because when you look at interviewing somebody, you typically hire the person you like best. It's not the most qualified or most experienced. And I think what we talked about with Nike, it's like, come on, if you were blindfolded, could you tell the difference between the sneakers?
Right. No, you couldn't.
That's a great point.
No, that's very true.
Right, but you somehow feel better with the swoosh on the side, and even with the shirts and the clothing. Come on, they're all made by the same people.
Yeah, Gary created this fascinating 5 essential business stories that you should be able to tell. And to me, that is really a just unfiltered look at how narrative is paramount in business and in leadership. Those 5 essential stories, because you understand what those stories are down to your bones. I messed up. Everybody just goes back to some anecdote. It's these 5 essential business stories are gold. I think that's just one of the myriad things that we touch on, but I think that's worth the price of admission right there, if I may be so bold.
A lot of good stuff in there. Also, we both tell the story of how we came to story, which I think is pretty exciting too. Everybody has a story of how they, when they first discovered narrative, whether it was a movie they saw or a storybook they were read as a kid, and all of a sudden your whole world is opened up to possibility.
And do you think storytelling or stories in general have the same bad branding that like meditation has, where I don't think anyone disbelieves that meditation's good for you, but just the word kind of puts you off? Because I think when you talk to a lot of people, certainly in business, about story and storytelling, they think that there's a particular formula that if you don't follow exactly, that you're messing it up.
Yeah, good point. But I think that it's changing. I think that perception is changing. If we rolled this out maybe 20 years ago, I don't think we would get as many head nods and people just getting it right off the bat. But these last couple of decades have been driven by narrative more than anything I can imagine. They've just been driven by narrative. Everything that happens, you'll see, on your whatever 24-hour news program that you favor, you'll see a pundit or an expert going, this reminds me of the incident in 1972, and as Santayana said, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it, or some analysis like that will lead you back to a narrative, a beginning, a middle, and end.
In the business environment too, Pinnacle trains we're in 50 countries around the world. And over the last 15 years, I've watched as executives, salespeople, leaders, the tolerance for 100 slides with walls of words and 18 bullet points per slide. The tolerance for that is not there anymore. People do not. If you come in with that kind of PowerPoint that you used to do back in 2001, people don't have time for it. They'd much rather, hey, give me 2 points on there and tell me a couple of stories or anecdotes that are going to illustrate your point that engage me. Because that's the thing about stories. Stories are going to, again, influence that emotion to motivate your action better than just a bunch of words on a slide.
That's it. And I've experienced that where you start at a company, they give you what I call the 75 slides of gold. Mm-hmm. And the CEO once said, if you don't present each one of these slides, you will not get this deal. And I said back to him, I go, if I do present these 75 slides, I will never get a deal.
That's a great point.
That's hilarious.
And I think you guys are right, because once you see an example of it, you find out all it is a small anecdote, an example that people can connect with, and we've all done it.
Right.
And that's another thing that people, don't naturally think of when they think of storytelling is the fact that anybody can put together 70 slides with pie charts and statistics on them to try to sell something. But the fact is, the only thing that we as business people have within us that nobody else has are these stories and the way that they're told. This is a very personal thing. So it's like the one thing you have that pretty much nobody else can do exactly like you. And I wish I could quote the actual progenitor of this statement, but somebody once said, the more specific your story, the more universal it is.
Great point.
The more intimate and personal, the more universal that story will be understood and will connect.
Excellent. Hey, this has been a great conversation. Where should people go to learn more about your work and get in touch with you?
Great. You can go to learn more about our program, Story Power, Mastering Narrative for Business and Beyond is the title. And you can go to info@pinper.com. That's INFO @PINPER.com. That is the Pinnacle Performance website. You can get more information there, and we can get you availability and get you scheduled so we can come into your organization and get you going.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Hey, I want to make sure you're checking out B2BRevenue.com. That is where you can get a free copy of an ebook that I did. It's a real ebook. It's not a fluff book. It shows and talks about how companies make buying decisions and how you can influence that from both a marketing and a sales standpoint, how to find all the people that are in the decision path and what they need to see, know, and touch and feel before they make a product selection. If your team needs some coaching, some help, some training, some systems, some processes that do work today, because we know what doesn't work, or you know what doesn't work, I'll show you what does work and how to connect and get into pretty much any account. It includes deal coaching and content community, and I can customize it for your particular company. Just go to B2BRevenue.com, look under training, schedule a call with me. We can talk it over, or just sign up. You can pay per month or all at once, whichever makes most sense for your budget. Also, I put out videos pretty much daily on LinkedIn and on YouTube. On LinkedIn, it's Brian G. Burns, and on YouTube, it's Brian Burns Sales. Just search for that if you like to consume some video content. And if you see me on LinkedIn, please put a comment and a share and a like on some of the videos. I really appreciate it. I've got a company page for each podcast. This one, the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast, where I put both content and humor videos out daily. And tell a friend about the podcast. Really appreciate you listening. Check out the show notes for all the partners and the connections you can make there, the coupon codes for the products to evaluate them, see if they're a right match for you. And we'll see you next time.